It is absolutely an honour to be here for the Royal Society of New South Wales and the Joint Academies Forum in what is a very timely and important gathering, and I appreciate the chance to be able to be here. I also pay my respects to the knowledge and traditions of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and Her Excellency did such a wonderful job, I think, of outlining the importance of space to our most earliest history. So it's I know that Her Excellency and Mr Wilson had to step away, but I just did want to thank them for sharing their house and their gardens for this wonderful event. I think one of the most spectacular government houses in the country. Ian Sloan, AO President of the Royal Society. Ian, it's wonderful that you sponsored this event and put it on for all of the Joint Academies as well. I'm also joined, as said, by my colleagues, Kerry, but also I have to behave myself because I have Stephen Freeland, who's a member of my advisory board. So it's wonderful to have as well colleagues and friends around. Paul Scully-Power, of course, our astronaut, just a wonderful tradition. I did also want to acknowledge Ken McCracken in the audience, someone who has been part of Australia's space development literally from the very first days, and it's just wonderful. We've agreed to have a cup of tea at some point. What I wanted to do today was just give you a quick update of where we are with the Australian Space Agency, but then I also wanted to turn my attention to the recent announcement by the Prime Minister that Australia would join the United States on the return to the moon and on to Mars. And I just wanted to touch on a bit of science. I'm a geologist, so you're going to get a bit of geology, but I just want to touch on that. Nations establish space agencies for many different reasons. It may be to demonstrate global dominance in technological development. Think of the United States, Russia, China. Other countries look to the inspirational capacity of science, and we're seeing that now with India inspiring a whole new nation of young graduates coming forward in that country. The Australian government's case was absolutely clear that the purpose here was to diversify our economy. I think we've been surprised as well by the capacity of space to inspire this country. So we set ourselves the purpose of transforming and growing Australia's space industry, and to do that, to lift the broader economy, to also improve the lives of all Australians. And we know as a small country we simply cannot do that without the global partnerships that we will need to participate. This is one of the most commercially focused purposes of any space agency in the world. We are not limiting our vision to expand as well into the future, and we certainly don't preclude expanding that into the whole scientific exploration area. There are some very important values that we use to establish the Australian Space Agency. We wanted to be known as a responsible citizen in space. We felt there was a real role for us, not just globally, but also in our region over time, to be that very important voice for a rules-based order in space, and to do our bit and at the global table. We had, and I think Kerry's coverage was extraordinary. We have the entrepreneurship, we have the can-do attitude, we absolutely have the ideas and the talent, as Lisa outlined. We have the capacity to run through the legs of giants. We've just got a little bit of catching up to do. And these are some of the values that absolutely run through the agency. In terms of what we're responsible for, civil space policy and strategy. For the regulatory piece as well, we coordinate civil space activities, and we also are looking to inspire and engage the Australian community. And of course, support the growth of the Australian space industry. And not just growth, but we truly wanted to see and facilitate and encourage and catalyse as much as possible a transformation of that industry. So let me just give you a quick update of some of the things that we've been up to, a bit like a report card. One of the first things we needed to do was to modernise our legislation. Her Excellency outlined the importance of a regulatory environment. This was on the back of some 10 years' work, so a lot of work going into that, but very early on, after the establishment of the agency in July, in August, our team managed to update the Civil Space Act into the Space Activities Amendment for launches and returns. A couple of key things in there. We needed to make sure our rules and laws covered the launch of spacecraft from aircraft, something it didn't actually anticipate, and also high-powered rockets. The agency has been in consultation around the country and has now written the rules for that, and we're now working with the industry on basically implementing those rules. We set ourselves the goal of engaging the nation, and we actually set ourselves the goal of 5 million Australians in our first year would hear, see or read about the agency. We felt that 1 in 5 was actually a pretty good target, but we blew past that literally in the first few weeks. So we really didn't appreciate just how much the country would engage. And I think what we were looking back, and a reason I wanted to acknowledge Ken, is actually we were looking back to what Australia did in the 60s, what Australia's participation here, and I think the sentiment was we absolutely should be back there. We know we've got the capability, the talent, the smarts to be able to do this. And of course, by October, we now have touched 110 million Australians. Now, I know we don't have 110 million Australians. It means that people are seeing and hearing about this new endeavour multiple times. Importantly, if you're going to transform an industry, you cannot do that from sitting in Canberra. You need to get out to where the industry is, which is in the states and territories, and we have worked very extensively through the Premier's and First Minister's office in each of the states and territories. In fact, in our first year, myself, my deputy and a team, every 12 weeks, we visited every state and territory to engage in that dialogue as to what we were seeing was happening and what they were seeing was happening, because of course the states and territories themselves have to have strategies for the growth of high-tech jobs. So it was a very good conversation. We set ourselves the goal of stimulating the investment of $2 billion into the sector, $1 billion of which we wanted to come from outside Australia into this country, so not just moving around money inside the country, because it's the investment of capital in the sector that truly grows jobs. We are well on the way of achieving that already. We set ourselves that goal to do that in the next few years. We're already at $1.6 billion of forward projected capital project pipeline, and that includes R&D investment, and 700 million of that is inbound capital. Now, if we looked at that, 2 years ago, it was literally just a couple of $100 million. So this investment of capital is also the world and others taking the signal, I think, from the Australian federal government and the stimulus that we're seeing around the states and territories, and saying Australia is serious about this, and that has created a good platform for investment. One of the things that the nation told us, and we listened very carefully to what the nation wanted of its space agency, and they said, do that which is not being done. You know, we love what CSIRO's doing, we love what Geoscience Australia's doing, we even like what ACMA's doing, the regulator, although they told us that in hushed tones. But we need it one door. We need one door, one voice. We're missing out on these opportunities that can truly only be brokered from government to government and through agency to agency. And I can remember writing this, but the day we had the announcements, it was actually true. You know, that we started to engage in these agencies, and so we realised that we just needed this extra catalyst to help these partnerships. We've now partnering, as you can see there, with multiple agencies around the world. That's as well the most recent agreements that we've had in the last month with New Zealand, DLR, and we've updated as well with ESA and the Italians. So we really are starting to open those doors for the purpose of our researchers and our industry to walk through those doors. as Kerry outlined, we're at the sort of cusp of a transformation from the investment in space by governments. So decades ago it was 80% government funding, 20% commercial. That has now completely flipped around, and we're seeing government still having a very significant role here. You need to remember NASA's budget is $20 billion a year. I'm not envious, a little. But we're seeing the commercial entities now dominating the investment, and we're seeing the industrialisation of low Earth orbit in itself. So we knew we needed a mechanism to be able to join together with industry partners to join us to be able to grow and transform this industry. So we formed something called the Statements of Intent and Cooperation. I won't go into the history of that. Let me at least give you the insight that we were told, well, you can't have agreements with industry. So I said, what if we don't call them agreements? And they said, well, that might work. So that's why we ended up with a strange name. But basically, it outlines our strategy, and we simply asked the industry not to cover what they were doing in their competitive world and what they do, but what were they going to do to support the objectives of the agency, and what were they going to do to invest in internship, in R&D, in establishing facilities here in Australia. What were they going to do to stimulate jobs? And we wanted it written down and committed to. It's been something I think that has helped generate that interest that we're seeing and the investment. I just wanted to highlight the areas that we have worked with the country to select as the national civil space priorities. We are a small country. We need to focus on those things that work well for us and where our competitive advantage is. I won't touch on them for very long, but just briefly give you a kind of feel. First of all, position, navigation and timing. Australia has made the commitment to bring our positioning in our maritime, our land and our airspace up to 10 centimetres accuracy. That kind of catches up with the world. We were kind of 5, in some cases 10 metre accuracy. We were behind the world. But importantly, the decision to move to precise positioning in our capital cities where we can take additional corrections from the mobile phone towers and get down to perhaps 3 to 4 centimetres. That means you can automate transport, you can do all sorts of things. So a really wonderful start, I think, to that investment. Geoscience Australia will do that. Earth observation, looking down, important. Lisa's talked about communication, the next generation of communication, laser optics, laser radio, some extraordinary work there. Space situational awareness, taking our role here in the Southern Hemisphere is important. Leapfrog R&D was actually a grab bag for all of the things that we're really good at, but we need to be world class and out there in the supply chains. Robotics and automation, a clear leader for Australia, and access to space. When we first started, it was like, it's not about rockets, it is about rockets now. So that was our priorities. Very quickly, in terms of NASA announcement, we will join, as I said, NASA to return to the moon and on to Mars. It's a $150 million program over 5 years. We'll do demonstrator projects that showcase our capabilities. We'll also work on some very significant major projects, and then we will support access of companies and researchers into the supply chains. That image there, by the way, is the Orion capsule for human transport, and that's a image of what the gateway will look like, which will orbit the moon and sit held between the gravity of moon and Mars. Just a bit of science now. One of the key things of going back to the moon and Mars will be the search for water. You need an awfully big rocket now to do this. One of the rockets, the Space Launch System, a payload of 26 tonnes. You'll be able to feel it launch from 3 kilometres away, somewhere deep in your chest. This is a big beast. This is the NASA program, Artemis 1. First of all, orbiting the moon, so taking human spacecraft, then taking humans in an orbit around the moon, then building out the components of the gateway, the power propulsion, the human habitat, and then also making sure that there's a lunar lander on there, and then Artemis 3 will be the crewed mission to the gateway and the lunar surface in 2024. The next phases of this, and Australia has the capacity to join in this up to Artemis 7. This is really living and working now on the moon and testing those technologies and things that we will need to go to Mars. Pretty exciting, actually. I'm a geologist, so you get a topo map of the moon. Sorry about that, but when I'm going anywhere new, first thing I do is get a topo map. I still do that. This is a topo map of the moon, near side and far side. Just focus on the colour variation. There's some 13 kilometres of elevation difference here between some of the heights and lows, so extraordinary. I'm getting the wind up here, so you're just going to get the water on moon. When we first looked at the moon and when most of us were at school, I think we saw it as flat and dry. But in December 2013, the Laddie mission noticed that there were water vapour coming, particularly connected with meteorite showers. So one of the first tasks of the mission to the moon will be to see if we can tap into that water that sits possibly below the surface. So thank you very much. We're working, as I said, very hard to build an agency for which Australia hopefully will be proud of. Thank you.